An alternative to sitting meditation. Aside from reading about Buddhism, there's the Buddhist practice itself. And when it comes to learning meditation, the traditional type of meditation that's first taught, at least in Tibetan Buddhism, is generally what's called shamatha in Sanskrit. And it's usually in English called tranquility meditation. So this is the place to start, because until the mind can be tranquil, until it can be steadied or calmed down, more advanced types of meditation like vipassana, insight meditation, can be very difficult. The usual approach with learning tranquility meditation, is to train the mind to stay on an object. And this is done by taking a simple object like the breath, a piece of wood, a pebble, and so on, and allowing our gaze to rest on the object itself. The type of object is not important. It can be anything, and the object itself is not examined. We don't review its qualities. We just bring the mind to focus on this object and allow it to rest there. If we become distracted, we don't spend any time scolding ourselves for drifting off, but simply and gently bring the mind back to the object and start again. And we repeat this for years if necessary. In my case, it was necessary. By constant repetition, by bringing the mind back to an object again and again and again, each time we get distracted or realize we're distracted, the mind is gradually trained, just like a dog, Pavlovian, to hang around home, to stay with the object. And like any rote learning task, this takes time and effort. And there's no obvious reward along the way other than the satisfaction of learning the technique, which, while very simple, as we can find out, quite difficult to master, to learn to allow the mind to just rest. So it's not as easy as you might imagine, because the moment we begin to try, the first thing we realize is how wild and unruly our mind actually is. It won't just sit like Fido. And even a dog has to be taught to sit. We can spend years coping with a mosquito-like swarm of thoughts that are buzzing around in our heads the moment we try to concentrate on the practice. Of course, dealing with this mass of interruptions and distractions, that's part and parcel of learning tranquility meditation. That's the whole point. To be able to allow the mind to rest in the midst of what have you. It's like when we stir up the sediment in our coffee. That sediment won't settle until the stirring stops. A helpful axiom might be what is pointed out in this little poem I wrote years ago. It's called simply The Rest of the Mind. You cannot rest the mind, but you can let the mind rest. Just let go and don't mind the rest. In other words, we can't rest the mind willfully or forcefully without training. And the training is to learn to allow the mind to come to rest on its own accord, to rest naturally. And as the old blues lyric saying, quote, "Take your fingers off it, don't you dare touch it, because you know it don't belong to you," end quote. I was surprised to find how difficult it was for me to do such a simple thing. And it took me a long, long time, like years, to master this. Now, there is an alternative approach that I know of, because ultimately I finally had to take this approach I'm going to describe for you here. Instead of trying to train our mind to concentrate and focus by rote practice, we can find an interest or a hobby or a passion that is already natural to us, something that so fascinates us that we just naturally are not distracted from it. We love to do it. And it has to be a subject that has some repetitive technique to it, like tying flies for fishing, or playing chess, or painting walls, or knitting. Anything that you are naturally interested in, but it has to be a discipline that we have already learned, can do automatically. So all of that learning stuff is already done. And this kind of approach is far better than the rote learning of a technique mechanically for its own sake, even including sitting meditation, or especially for me, including sitting meditation. With something that we already love to do, we're happy to focus on it and do this long enough with our natural concentration and love of doing it, and we get the same results as the more traditional method of learning tranquility meditation by rote. And in my opinion, we get it in a more pure form, and that has been my experience. However, the only problem with this approach I'm describing is that although we naturally can concentrate focus in this method, we also need to keep aware that we're focusing. We have to be aware of what we're doing. But in my opinion, this is more easily done than wrestling with the problems of the first method, of endlessly trying to, by rote, learn to let the mind rest. And it was through this second technique that I finally learned meditation properly. And it happened almost by accident. So as they say, we can choose our poison. All of us need to learn tranquility meditation. We need to learn to allow the mind to be calm. And as I mentioned above, are the only two ways that I know to do this. Sitting on a cushion and doing it, or the second, this alternative approach of finding something that we already have some rote discipline down. We already love and can do it. So I took the second path quite by chance, but in my case, it was the one that worked for me. Using the first method and trying to drum up interest in an uninteresting technique, in my opinion, never worked very well. It was much easier for me to focus on something that I liked and do what I already liked to do, provided I could maintain an awareness of just what I was doing and not just get lost in daydreams. And I don't think that attempting to learn a technique like shamatha, tranquility meditation by rote, at least for me, was very conducive to meditation. Perhaps we can tell ourselves that we will just learn the technique by rote and then lovingly meditate. But I question this approach. Much better, at least for some of us, is to learn tranquility meditation while focusing on something that we love to do, something we have already learned that requires focus, patience, repetition, and so forth. Keep in mind that the technique of shamatha, of tranquility meditation, is nothing more than allowing the mind to concentrate and rest at the same time on an object. When that is done, so that we can rest in that way for as long as we wish, then we have learned the technique. That's it. If we focus on something that we love, something we care about, and bring our mind to rest doing that, we have the added qualities of loving what we focus on, of being happy doing it, and we're not in a hurry to be done with anything. In my opinion, that's the best approach, in particular because shamatha, tranquility meditation, is not considered in Buddhist teachings as an end in itself. That's not the end that we're trying to get to, but tranquility meditation is only the stage or the platform for then learning what's called vipassana meditation, insight meditation. And as mentioned, some of us may not take to rote learning so easily. And those are some of the reasons. Regardless of what they are, the bottom line is that I don't do well doing anything by rote. I never learned to play the piano, as my mother knows only too well. I wish she was still here. And I never could memorize stuff just for the sake of memorizing, or do anything just because someone, including myself, told me to. Everything in my life, in order to keep me alive, has to be more spontaneous than that. It has to feel right, and it has to feel natural. I couldn't learn in school either. I have taught myself most all of what I know as I felt like learning it, not as I was told to do so. And I'm ashamed to say, and deeply ashamed to say, that I practiced shamatha meditation, tranquility meditation, sitting on the cushion for something like 32 years, just as I was told to do, and nothing much came of it either. And that, my friends, is embarrassing. There is an old saying, and I quote, he wrote canzones, songs, because he had a will to write canzones, and not because love moved him to it. And no one thought much of him or his canzones. And to me, that's funny. However, when I took up close-up nature photography, and I focused through fine camera lenses at nature, which I love, nature and lenses, and then I went on to stack photos, sometimes dozens of images combined to make a single photo appear more in focus. Then out of that process, meditation came easily and naturally. So friends, as they say, I'm just saying. Without confusing you too much, I must point out that in fact I learned Vipassana first, doing that process of photography with lenses in nature, and then only afterward did shamatha meditation fall into line perfectly. So, in other words, once I grasped Vipassana, insight meditation, shamatha was easy. Obviously, it was already there. My job for decades as a computer programmer involved very, very technical and concentrated work, decades and decades of it. So I already could concentrate well, and I have the ability to focus on a work subject and to be pretty much undistracted. Much of the credit because I tend to always be very interested and in love with what I'm doing. That's kind of my point here, the loving of what you're doing. In the long run, it was much easier for me to learn meditation by practicing with something I was absolutely interested in than it was for me to practice just for the sake of practicing. Like attempting to rest my mind on, just any old thing like a pebble or a stone or a piece of wood and so on. I know that this is traditional, but what I'm presenting here is an alternative, not an imperative. And if any old object of focus is fine, which the teachings say is fine, then why not use something we already love that interests us? Using something familiar lets us learn awareness and trust that there is at least some concentration in what we've already naturally learned, and from that habit, learn from that habit that we've already acquired, which is that the kind of thing that we learn when we're working with something we care about. So I can do that all day. So right there is the required shamatha. That's what it is we try to attain through sitting on a cushion. It just didn't work for me. Now, I want to talk a bit about the insight meditation, what's called Vipassana. But this is a lot more complex, and perhaps I'll only be able to touch on it here. But still, in my case, as I mentioned, I learned Vipassana with a camera while peering through a very fine close-up lens at miniature natural worlds and critters, bugs and small little plant dioramas. So the shamatha was already there because I was totally there. I was concentrating, focusing on a subject, and with extreme patience and love. Multiply that by doing this day after day after day for an entire season, and you have kind of a recipe for a Vipassana breakthrough, and that's just what happened to me. So what's the takeaway from all this? Learning the shamatha technique by rote practice is fine. It's nice work as you can get it, if you can get it, as the old saying is, provided that you learn to realize that a blind repetition is probably not conducive to why we want to learn shamatha, or sitting meditation, in the first place. If our rote learning, if that is stained because of effort or boredom or approach avoidance on the days we don't feel like doing it, or dullness, we're really not preparing the mind for Vipassana meditation. And that's why we learn shamatha in the first place. Remember that although shamatha to some degree, tranquility meditation, is required in order to settle the mind, to stabilize it, to calm it, none of the major texts that I know, the Buddhist texts that I know, say that this form of meditation, shamatha, is any kind of end or stopping place in itself. What they do say is that we need a calm mind in order to effect Vipassana meditation. The teachings say that shamatha will calm our unsettled mind, but by itself will never remove any of the deeper causes for our mental unrest. Only Vipassana meditation can do that. So that's an important point. And the analogy that I came up with is this. If we want to thread a very fine needle, but have shaky hands, then shamatha steadies the hands so that Vipassana can thread the needle. It's Vipassana that is the sought-for result, not shamatha. Therefore, we need to learn shamatha, but I'm pointing out that how we learn shamatha may well influence how easy it is to learn Vipassana, insight meditation. So, if we settle for learning shamatha by rote practice, like we would learn the mechanics of any technique that's required, like in school, we run the risk of not finding the process altogether agreeable. If this then leads to our avoiding practice, or developing an approach avoidance attitude to sitting practice, or we otherwise stain the practice through boredom, dullness, sleepiness, or trying to march through it by rote alone, then that kind of attitude further obscures our mind rather than clarifying it. We're deeper in debt. If we have trouble with the traditional approach to learning shamatha, and if we want to pursue the second method, the one I'm describing here, the one that worked for me, which involves mixing learning shamatha with something that we love, something that we've already have developed concentration through, then we pretty much have the basics of shamatha already learned. We just then have to learn how to be aware and stay aware in whatever we're concentrating on as we're doing it. Concentrate on what we enjoy doing, but be aware of what we're doing in the bargain. And as far as calming the mind, if we do that, that's already taken care of. And we are ready to learn Vipassana, insight meditation, which is another whole story. I'm sure this can sound a little convoluted here, but read it carefully or listen carefully, and it should make sense. And making sense is the whole reason for language.